The Walking Dead. What can I say? It's a TV show about zombies. Zombies seem to be reserved for movies and video games, and it's kind of interesting that someone hasn't expanded the zombie apocalypse into the realm of television. Perhaps it's the fact that the story arc of zombie fiction is generally pretty short. I mean, think about it. In zombie movies and video games, there are really only 3 possible scenarios. Number 1, the protagonist dies or is turned into a zombie. Number 2, the zombie outbreak is contained in some way, and the protagonist is rescued or is able to escape. Or, number 3, the protagonist is a badass scientist who is able to find the cure all by his lonesome. So how do you stretch a zombie outbreak into a television show that spans multiple seasons? Do you use filler episodes that don't accomplish anything and leave the viewer just frustrated enough to tune in next week? Well, yeah, actually, and that's exactly what The Walking Dead does. Looks like someone was taking notes while they were watching Lost. Now, I haven't read any of the graphic novels, but from what I can tell, according to what I've read on the internet, the graphic novels move the story on way more quickly than the TV show. Which is pretty interesting because a series of graphic novels is similar to a television show in terms of story progression and story arc. My guess is that the show isn't cut out for its hour-long time slot, and its pacing would have greatly benefited from a half-hour time slot. However, due to the overwhelming popularity of the graphic novel, I think they smelled a pretty major cash cow on their hands, and decided to draw the series out as long as they possibly could. Now, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the plot. I don't want to spoil anything for those who haven't seen it yet, because the first season is definitely worth checking out. I just want to give you the reaction I had as I watched through the show. I didn't start watching the show immediately, but rather heard from numerous friends how awesome it was. So, alright, I figured I'd check out the pilot and see what I thought. The show opens with a lone cop wandering through a deserted country road looking for gas. He spots a little girl shuffling between flipped-over cars, and like every other character in the zombie movie, he tries talking to her. Rookie mistake. Granted, as soon as she turns around, he shoots her in the head pretty quick. She's clearly a zombie, and the cop aims for the head. Alright, I can get into this show. Then we see a flashback of the cop, named Rick Grimes, BZ, or Before Zombies. He's talking with his partner about his rocky relationship with his wife, and how it affects their son. Pretty typical background information. Rick's a stoic cop who has a hard time expressing himself to his wife and son, but deep down he loves them. Shane, his partner, is a bit selfish and egotistical, but ultimately cares about the well-being of Rick and his family. Their backstory sesh is interrupted by a call, and they speed off to stop some bad guys. Rick ends up getting shot and falls into a coma at the hospital. 28 days later, he wakes up and... No, seriously, he wakes up in the hospital to find that everything has gone to shit. Now, I have no problem with paying homage to something that's awesome, and the scene where Jim, the main character of 28 Days Later, wakes up in the hospital and explores an abandoned London is one of my favorite movie scenes of all time. It's obvious that the creators were referencing this scene, especially since the comic came out a mere 4 months after 28 Days Later was released in the US. But watching this scene after seeing 28 Days Later really ruined it for me. For one, the viewer already knows that there's been a zombie outbreak. The girl from the opening is clearly a zombie. Not to mention that the show is called The Walking Dead. So obviously there's been a zombie outbreak. And 2, Rick's hospital room just has a gurney pushed in front of it. Come on, that wouldn't stop any zombies. They would smell the living flesh and eat Rick while he was still asleep. 28 Days Later does it so much better. The viewer is almost as clueless as Jim. All they know is that a monkey who is infected with something referred to as rage attacked some animal rights activists. While the viewer has some theories about what's going on, they want Jim to find answers as much as Jim does. Not only that, but Jim is actually locked in his hospital room. And 28 Days Later has an incredible song that builds the tension to a boiling point as Jim slowly finds out what's going on. I know I'm nitpicking now, but you really can't help draw the comparison. 28 Days Later really did do it better. Well, I won't give any more of the plot away for those who haven't seen the show yet. Suffice to say, the first season is awesome. It is just the right blend of action and downtime to build the tension. There's also a good bit of drama thrown in as well, something that zombie films generally overlook. The characters all have backgrounds, and as you watch, you learn a little more about each one of them. To be honest, it's a lot like Lost, where you learn a little more about each character the more you watch, but with enough zombie-killing action to break up the more boring downtime. You could even watch the first season as its own miniseries. It has a beginning, middle, and climactic end that ties up all the loose ends, for the most part. As soon as I finished the first season, I started right in on the second. The first season doesn't really end on a cliffhanger. The viewer simply wants to see what the band of survivors are going to do next. First episode starts off strong, but season 2 quickly devolves into one boring conversation after another. I get that the characters have accepted that there is no reversing what has already happened, and they are learning to cope with life in the zombie apocalypse. But I feel like I'm watching the freaking Jerry Springer show or something. All the characters ever do is get into arguments. It's all moral dilemmas, love triangles, and guilt. I get that they're trying to examine how real people would react if they had to live through the zombie apocalypse, but come on, this is so boring. Without giving too much away, the survivors find a farm full of other survivors who are willing to take them in. And for the next 4 episodes, all they do is argue about whether they should stay or not. Now, let me just stop and say that I was watching Season 2 as it aired on TV, as opposed to Season 1, which I was watching online. So I actually had to wait for new episodes to air. By the time I got to Episode 6, and they were still on that freaking farm, I was done. Now I know Episode 6 had a dramatic conclusion, and they were clearly building to something big, but I just didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to wait week in and week out to see if they were finally going to get to whatever they were building to, like I did with Lost, where I can't even count how many years. I was done with the show's slow pacing, and was fed up with all the intense dramatic dialogue. After all, it's only a TV show. Well, newer episodes have come and gone, and I still don't care. I find it kind of interesting just how different the first and second seasons really are. I loved the first season, and quickly grew bored of the second. Now I know I only made it 6 episodes into the second season, and I've heard that the second season got a lot better, but I still don't care. I guess you could say I have the Lost syndrome, after watching 6 seasons of Lost and being no more satisfied after watching the finale than I had been after watching the pilot. I had had enough. I no longer have patience with shows that say tune in next week to get answers, only to hear the same thing at the end of the next episode. I can overlook it when I'm watching episodes online, and when an episode has an unsatisfying conclusion, I can just watch the next episode. But when I have to wait a whole week for more disappointment, I just can't stay interested. The same thing is happening with the show How I Met Your Mother, my current obsession. I watched the first couple of seasons online and loved it. But now that I've actually caught up with the syndication, I'm starting to grow really tired of it. It's one thing to wade through all the bullshit and filler episodes when you can just watch the next one right away. But when I have to wait a week to see if Ted actually mentions something about the mother, I get kinda pissed. I don't even enjoy How I Met Your Mother anymore. I've outgrown the humor, I've stopped being able to identify with the characters, and my patience is wearing out. I just want to see who the damn mother is. I know that when I do find out, I'm not even going to feel any kind of gratification. I just feel like I've invested too much time in the show to give up now. So here's my strategy for The Walking Dead, and I think you'll agree. Watch the first season, which is awesome, and then wait 10 years and watch the rest of the show on Green-Ray. Then when you get to the boring filler episodes, you can just skip them. Hey, I'm pretty proud of myself. I just figured out how to watch TV.
Hey, come on, man. Don't give me that gangster shit.